Mate, why are you trying to fool your audience saying that you've read papers on this topic when you clearly didn't even read the abstract of the paper that you're citing in your video?
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another episode of Fact Checked, the series where I use my expertise in psychology and behavioral science to fact check the psychology advice given by other people on the internet. In this episode, we're looking at a guy called Karma Medic. He's a medical student turned productivity YouTuber. Now I know what you're thinking, Pete, that's not how you pronounce Ali Abdaal. No, I promise you, this is a different guy. He's absolutely crushing it on YouTube. He's got well over 1 million subscribers at this point, and he decided to make a video on habits. Now, while he might be an expert on the human body, I'm an expert on habit psychology. So let's see what he has to say about building habits, and stick around till the end of the video if you want to find out what score he gets out of 10. Let's jump into it.
It can be so tough to break old habits and start making new ones. Habits are all about having discipline to do the things that you actually want to do. You've got to be clear about why you want things to change, but it can be tough to keep habits going for a long period of time, especially if you don't see success towards the beginning. If you feel like your discipline is wearing thin, then here are some tips to help you make new habits and stick to them, and also break bad ones. I think we've all...
Okay, so right off the bat, it's a bit of a mixed bag. He's saying some things which are really good, like, oh, people tend to fall off the bandwagon if they don't see success early on, but he's also reiterating a lot of those habit guru tips which aren't really backed by science. Things like you need more discipline in order to build habits, or you really need to understand the real why behind your habit. These things are not really proven in the literature to be very effective, so it's a bit of a mixed bag at the start of this video. Let's see how he does for the rest of it.
Been in the position where we've promised ourselves we'll drink more water or exercise more often or just study more efficiently, but it just doesn't happen. Instead of making new habits, excuses become routine. In this video, I want to use scientific literature and evidence to figure out how we can convert the intention of changing our habits into actual change and growth. If your goal is to go to the gym 5 times a week, then it's going to be very difficult for you to have the discipline to suddenly make that big change from 0 days to 5. It's really important to start small with the habits that you want to implement into your life so that you can actually get gradual progress and get going. If you want to go to the gym 5 times a week and you're currently not going at all, then it obviously makes sense to start with once or twice a week and then work your way up from there. Of course, there's a lot to say about setting realistic goals, and that's something that I'm going to cover later on in this video. But for now, making small changes that you can build onto to make bigger changes in your life has actually been proven to be really helpful to habit formation. In one study, volunteers wanting to lose weight were randomized to a habit-based intervention based on things like 10 small diet and activity behavior changes, or a non-treatment waiting list control. After 8 weeks, the intervention group had lost 2 kilograms compared to 0.4 kilograms in the control group. And at 32 weeks, the completers of the intervention group had lost an average of 3.8 kilograms. It's always worth breaking down your goals into bite-sized chunks so that you're not feeling so overwhelmed that you give up early. This is something that I do every single day in medical school. It's very easy to see a huge mountain of a task that you need to climb, and it's easy to get overwhelmed and get put off after a day or two. Instead, breaking down that mountain of a task into a bunch of smaller hills makes it a lot easier to tackle. Try focusing on what's directly in front of you. Just worry about jumping over that first hurdle before you even think about the next.
So this point about starting small is kind of BJ Fogg's favorite thing to talk about. He's the tiny habits guy who says that all of your habits have to start with something that is really easy and achievable. Now, there is actually some evidence to support this idea of starting small. The idea being that if you're able to accomplish your small goals in the beginning, then that builds confidence, that builds ability and self-efficacy, which is a term we use in psychology to describe people's belief in themselves, and therefore you're more likely to be successful in the long run. But there's also some countering evidence that says that if goals are too easy, then that is also demotivating. If your goals are so easy that it doesn't even feel like you've achieved anything when you do them, then that's also counterproductive. So while he's not wrong, there is more nuance to the point that he is making. Let's see how he does with the rest of his points.
Your narrative. What I mean by this is the things that you tell yourself that get you out of committing to the habits that you actually want to stick to. If you already know all of your usual excuses, then you can figure out good ways to address them. Getting out ahead of the narrative that you tell yourself that prevents you from success is a great way forward. Some of the most common things that people tell themselves when they're trying to break bad habits are that I have to do this thing because I can't help myself, or I don't have the time, or I'll do it later, and of course later never comes. Or the absolute classic, I'm just not motivated right now. Spoiler alert, it's not about motivation. Motivation is a myth. It's all about discipline. If you can have an immediate response...
Okay, he was doing so well, but then massive red flag. He says it's not all about motivation. Motivation's a myth. It's all about discipline. This statement is very problematic. While I agree that building habits is not all about motivation, motivation is not a myth. People definitely feel more motivated at certain times of the year, at certain points during the habit formation process. Just ask Katie Milkman and the Fresh Start Effect all about motivation. And then to go and say that it's not about motivation, instead it's about discipline, this is that kind of toxic productivity culture that puts all the onus on people rather than on their environment, which in the research has been shown to be the more important factor when trying to build habits. It's not about yourself, it's not about how disciplined you are internally, it's about setting up your environment in a way to help you succeed. So I do find the point that he's making here pretty problematic, but let's see if he can back it up with anything more substantial.
And one more thing, as I was editing this video, I actually looked up the citation that he put in the bottom right corner when he was making this statement. And if you literally read the abstract, it says that self-control, which is what their measure of discipline was, had no bearing on people's ability to form habits. So he's literally citing a paper that says the opposite of what he's claiming in the video. Mate, why are you trying to fool your audience saying that you've read papers on this topic when you clearly didn't even read the abstract of the paper that you're citing in your video?
To your own excuses of not doing something, then you're already way ahead of the game. For example, if you often tell yourself that you're not motivated to study or do X or Y activity, then instead you can focus on changing your thought patterns into thinking about discipline, thinking about creating consistent patterns over time and small gains every day which lead to overall success and achievement. It's not about any one event or activity, but it's about the whole period of time in which you're doing something. You can also find ways to cheerlead yourself or, be your own hype man and do the task until it becomes a habit. I do this all the time. I play Jedi mind tricks on myself to convince myself to get things done even when I might not really want to. And before you know it, it becomes a habit. Every day it gets easier.
So this whole point is all about trying to shift your mindset, and it's this kind of weird, unsubstantiated idea that James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits and that he's now regurgitating in this video. And in my opinion, this is the core of the toxic productivity industry that puts all the blame on people, saying that your mindset is wrong, that you don't have enough discipline, and that's why you're failing at life, when in reality, it's probably because their environment isn't setting them up for success, and so they need to change that in order to help themselves.
Habit formation itself actually varies a lot in the amount of effort that's needed. We've all probably heard of that statistic which says that it takes 21 days in order to build up a habit, but it's not that straightforward. In fact, one study showed that some people managed to form certain habits as quickly as 18 days, but others needed as much as 6 months. This might seem really overwhelming and could even deter people from starting to put things in place to form habits that they want to stick to or to break bad habits that they already have. The prospect of this journey taking 6 months can seem like a lot.
Okay, so I will give him some credit for making this point that there is no magic number when your habit will form. It can vary massively depending on who you are, the situation you're in, and what habit you're trying to build. So, okay, credit where credit's due. This point he's making is pretty good.
Except that, we're all different, and that for me, one habit might take a very long time to build or break, whereas for someone else it might take a very short time, and vice versa. Patience is really important, and realizing that you don't have to be at the same standard as everyone else for every little thing can really take that burden off your shoulders. In order to keep up with your habits, you need to reduce friction as much as you want to help you stick to them. For example, if you want to go for a run every morning, then you need to do everything you can in advance of that run to make sure that you have the best chance of actually going through with it. Now, this might mean getting your work done the night before so that you don't have your usual excuse of, well, I'm not going to go on a run because I need to study or I have a lot of work to do. It might be laying out your work clothes on the couch next to your bed. It's about building and changing the environment around you to help you get the task done that you need to do. Whatever it is, whatever you choose to do, try something that will make getting the actual habit done easier or breaking your current habit easier. You can start by asking yourself why you haven't followed through with this particular habit in the past, and then you can address that particular and specific problem and go from there. One great technique that's discussed in James Clear's book called Atomic Habits, which is a fantastic read if you're into habit forming and making, check it out, is to anchor a new habit to an existing one. So for example, if you want to go for a run, you can place your toothbrush on top of your workout clothes in the bathroom. And that way, next time you brush your teeth in the morning, your workout clothes are literally right there. You can't ignore them. And so those two habits become linked together. This is one of my absolute favorites.
Okay, so he's talked about friction now, and that's a much more solid, substantiated point. If you want to build habits, it's all about environment design, and reducing friction to the habits you want to build is really important, and adding friction to the ones you want to break is also a great strategy. He also touches on a technique called habit stacking, which, as he said, is when you add one habit onto an existing one. This practice is legit. It's been tested multiple times in the scientific literature. It is a technique that seems to work. So full credit to Karma Medic here. Really good point he's made. Although there are better books about habits than Atomic Habits, I'll just say that.
of university and that has stuck with me throughout all my years in higher education is the importance of making appropriate goals. The general principle is that you need to make SMART goals. SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. This is so important because all the time people set unrealistic goals for themselves which are never going to be completed, and it just makes the entire thing such a waste of time, causing you to give up early. I've had friends look me dead in the face and say something like, I'm gonna study for 15 hours today, or I'm gonna write 3 essays which are due next week all today, or I'm gonna go to the gym, study 4 hours, see my girlfriend, meal prep for the week, and then go party in the evening. And I'm always like, dude, you obviously can't do all of that. Just choose one or a few tasks that are most important to you, focus on those, and complete them one at a time. When making goals, you want to be really specific about them, and tied to that, you want to be really specific about what you're trying to achieve by forming a new habit or what you're trying to achieve by breaking an old or bad one. If you're not, then you run the risk of letting yourself off each time and not having a clear path of where you want to go and be. Goals that are measurable help you know exactly when you've hit the goal that it is you're working towards. So for example, if you want to study at least 2 hours a day, then you know how to measure how long you're spending studying on Anki or past papers or whatever it is. Your goal needs to be achievable.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop right there so we can cover the first two, specific and measurable. Having specific goals is really important because, like you said, people are very easy to let themselves off. In psychology, we would call this process post-rationalization. Basically says that rather than thinking about why we should do something and then doing it, instead we do things and then justify our behavior later. And it's so easy to do that when we slack off on our habits. We make these excuses, or post-rationalizations as psychologists would call it. And so being specific stops that from happening. And measurable. Measurable is also really good idea. There's a ton of research that shows that when people have feedback on their habits, then they're actually more likely to be successful. And that's because that feedback can tell you if what you're doing to build your habit or achieve your goal is actually helping you or not. So by having something that is measurable, that can give you feedback, I also agree will help you achieve your goal. Okay, let's carry on with the rest of this acronym.
So that you're not setting yourself up to fail. Honestly, don't play yourselves, guys. Just make sure that you're being realistic about the goals that you're setting, not like I'm gonna go to the gym 3 times a day, unless you're an athlete or something. It's crucial for the goal to be relevant to some life change that you want to make, and you make it personal to you. And also make sure that you set clear goals about when you want to have achieved your outcome. If you're not clear with yourself about all of these things, then chances are you'll find ways around your goals and you'll cheat yourself out of your own success.
So the rest of the points that he's making here about SMART goals, yep, totally valid, totally legit. And, you know, SMART goals, it's a little bit basic, but sometimes the basics are just fundamental for what is a good practice to have. So I can totally get behind this advice of setting yourself SMART goals when it comes to your habits.
I think it's easy for me to sit here and talk about all the ways you could form habits, but the truth is it's really tough. A ton of studies have shown how difficult it is to form new habits and how most people struggle to keep up with them. You can't expect all of your attempts to change or form habits to be successful. I've certainly tried and failed to form several habits in the last couple of years, but the point is that it's all right to try, even with all of these tips in place, and fail. You have to be ready to slightly change your path and technique and try again. It's okay to not get things right the very first time. Personally, I think it's all about trying your best, whatever your best is, and having the expectation that you might fail, and then it might take a few tries to get this thing done. It's a lot easier to go into habit breaking or making with a realistic expectation as opposed to one that's unrealistic, like being able to get everything right first try. If you have unrealistic standards, then this might lead to you giving up more easily or earlier on than the required amount of effort or time that it takes to make or break a habit. Try not to give up, have realistic expectations, and keep on trying.
Okay, so I do really like this point about being easy on yourself. It's definitely not an easy thing to change people's habits. Everybody fails. I failed, even though I know all the techniques in the book about how to change habits. Definitely agree you should be easy on yourself, but I'd also take it a step further. Like, don't just be easy on yourself in the sense that, oh, you know, lots of other people fail at their habits, but also be easy on yourself in the fact that it's probably not down to yourself. If you failed in your habits, it's probably because there's something in your environment that's not quite setting you up for success yet. And it's all about changing the environment in the right way to get you to that endpoint. Yes, of course, there's a little bit of motivation needed to get you off that initial hurdle, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is setting up your environment correctly.
Internally when thinking about habits is incredibly important. A big part of changing your habits is about changing your thought patterns around a new behavior you want to start doing in your life. The but rule is something that you can use to change around your thinking when you're feeling as though things aren't working out, or if you're having negative thoughts that's getting in the way of your success. Essentially, you turn around your negative thought by adding but to the end of the thought and coming up with a positive to lift it. You might say, for example, that you suck at studying X or Y topic, But if you work on it tonight, then tomorrow's session is going to be easier and you'll have a better understanding of it next time. Or that you're currently not that fit and getting tired quite quickly, so you don't want to go to the gym because it's a wasted effort. But if you go for even one day, then you'll improve bit by bit and you'll build up your stamina more and more. Immediately, with this very simple attitude change, you feel better about the negative aspect of the tasks and you're more encouraged to keep going through it. Changing your thinking is key to changing your habits. And like I said before, I play these Jedi mind tricks on myself all the time. 90% of the challenge is just starting and going to get the thing done. Once you show up, you can enter your usual autopilot mode and just keep on going.
Now, this point is a bit of a tricky one. It's not completely wrong, but it's also not really completely right. He's saying that changing your mindset is fundamental to changing your habits, when the bulk of the literature that studies this topic directly disagrees with that. Instead, what's most important for changing habits, like I keep saying in this video, is about changing your environment, and it's not to do with yourself or your internal mindset, but more to do with that. However, there is a lot of research also on something called self-compassion, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's about being kind to yourself and not beating yourself up over things. And that has also been proven to have a lot of positive psychological effects, including increasing motivation and reducing your chances of having mental health problems. And of course, mental health problems are going to be detrimental to your habits. So while I think that he's exaggerating the importance of changing your mindset when it comes to your habits, he's also not completely wrong.
That I got from a Matt Diavella video, shout out to you Matt, is this idea of the 2-day rule. Personally, what I call it is once but never twice. The concept of the 2-day rule is to never skip the thing you're trying to accomplish for more than 2 days in a row. For example, if you want to walk for 20 minutes every day as your new habit and you miss it for one day, then that's okay. But missing it for 2 days in a row is not. Once you miss that walk for the second day, then it becomes all too easy to tell yourself to miss a third day, and then a week, and then a month, and before you know it, you've stopped trying to build this habit. You're back to where you started. So giving yourself that free day off of being able to miss something lifts a lot of weight off of your shoulders, and it means that you can have days where life gets in the way and you're unable to continue working on your habit, and that's fine. But keeping it to 1 day instead of 2 helps to keep you accountable and ensures that you keep up the habit for the long term. This is the exact technique that I use when going to the gym. I'm allowed to skip a day of going to the gym whenever I want, but I try really hard to not allow myself to skip 2.
So Matt Diavella's 2-day rule, while it wasn't developed with any kind of specific psychology in mind, there is actually related research which could support this idea. There's 2 reasons why I think the 2-day rule is important. One is that it forces you to get multiple repetitions in per week. And we know that people who repeat behaviors often are more likely to build habits. And that's because it's through repetition that our brain makes those associations between rewards and contexts and behaviors. And so therefore, people who repeat behaviors more often end up doing them more automatically. So for that reason, the 2-day rule is quite valuable. And also because the 2-day rule inherently allows a little bit of flexibility into your habit building process. And cool research from Katie Milkman has shown that building in a little bit of flexibility into your habit making process makes it more likely that you'll be able to stick with it in the long term. Whereas being too rigid means that if there's a slight disruption to your stable routine, then your whole habit goes out of whack. So that's another reason why the 2-day rule is quite nice, is because it builds in those buffers, those mulligans, those free passes for yourself when, just life stuff gets in the way of your habit building. So yeah, I'm on board with the 2-day rule. I think it's a pretty good one. And so that brings me to Karma Medic score out of 10. So if you've never watched this series before, the way it works is that we give everybody a 10 out of 10 and then we deduct points for every incorrect thing they said. So Karma Medic made a lot of very good points, but he did say a few things that I disagree with. Like, for example, that motivation is a myth, and also the fact that he said that it's all about discipline. Those are 2 big no-nos for me, so minus 2 points, 1 for each of those. I also think that he plays up the importance of mindset far too much. To me, it seems quite obvious that he's just taken that advice straight from Atomic Habits and is regurgitating it here on the video, and I'm not really a big fan of that because it's not really that well substantiated in the evidence. So I'm going to deduct 1 point for that, but I am going to actually add an extra bonus point because it was an enjoyable video to watch, and I really like the SMART goals advice. You don't often see that in habit videos, and even though it is quite basic, it is actually really good, solid advice. So overall, minus 3 plus 1, I'm going to give him 8 out of 10, which is still pretty good. If you guys know somebody who you think I should fact check, then let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video or you learned something, can you please give me a thumbs up, because it really helps me out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.